A very good morning to everybody in attendance. It's a lovely 11:10 a.m. here in Malaysia. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Akash, for starting us off. So my name is Sophie Aslan, and I am a project coordinator at a local company here at Passion Republic. I am also a game developer. And today, I'm also the moderator of today's session, Games That Changes, exploring the intersection of game design and behavioral change. So in layman's terms, this is really about like experiencing a game and you play it and you realize like, I think differently now. I feel the feelings. So that's really what it's going to be about today. We're going to be talking to two very well-known, very esteemed, very lovely developers, giving their insight on what it goes into making games that inspire that kind of change. And it's from two different perspectives, both fighting for their own individual causes. And I'm so excited to get to talk to them and find out like, why they champion these causes. What is the research that goes into making the games that changes? Very exciting. So today's panel comprises of two internationally known developers who are well acquainted with games, and they've made very powerful messages in their games from two different perspectives. First of all, we have Sakina Latif, who is our homegrown developer. She is known for her work in Persona Theory games. They are the developers of Fires at Midnight, Project Half-Light, and also the upcoming Cabaret. Please wishlist them on Steam, support your local game devs, We also have Michelle Olsen here. She is our international talent, an American developer known for her work on Plasticity and Beasts of Maravilla Island. So exciting. So without further ado, let's have each one of our lovely ladies say hello.
Morning,
Hello.
Everyone. Hi.
Yeah, I've had coffee, so as you can tell. Chug. Right. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to talk to each of you about like your games, and then we can talk about what the games can do. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go.
So first of all, like Sakina, can you tell us about your journey as a developer and like tell us more about the projects that you're on?
Yeah, sure. Personally, I have no background in games whatsoever except for owning the first gen Game Boy, the gray one, the very bulky one, and the Nintendo 64.
The paperweight, yes.
Yeah, the paperweight. And I think after that I owned this game called on the Game Boy called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't know who among you guys actually play. It was so old. But funny story that because of that game, I really wanted to like as a young kid, I really love games. It's been my life. But professionally, I was a producer in advertising, so I did a lot of ads. Maybe you've seen some of my work like Prosperity Burger. So all of those was thanks to me, especially the onion polish. That was so much to me, and fooling everyone about our burgers. But yeah, let's go. Yeah, but I think after a while of doing like work for other people, for other brands, I wanted to be more fulfilled in life. I think I had a midlife crisis quite early on in my life. I'm like, I need, there's got to be more to life than just ads and doing things for other people. I wanted to know more about myself. I wanted to know more about my culture, about people. So that's when I somehow stumbled into games with my co-founder named Buddy, who's also from film. He's like three generation of film directors, and then he's from the Asian Film Academy. And then my third co-founder is Derek. He's also from digital marketing. So the three of us embarked on this. None of us have backgrounds in games, except what we really love games. Okay, we really love games. So we the three of us who have no business in games started like, oh, let's make a game company. Nothing can go wrong, right? Let's go. Also partly because when we were making the content for Sarah is Missing was done by us, and it was on little to no budget. I literally called friends like Tamina, let's do this Blair Witch project thing. And when we were making the project and we put it up, then we realized there was a lot of people interacting with it. So I don't know how much you guys know about film and TV. There's a lot of red tape, censorship, a lot of things to go through for you to even get your content out there. And then it's a very one-way feel. Like you put your film out there, and then you ask your friends, so what do you think? And then they say, it's okay. So with Sarah's missing, we had the back and forth, and people were like, "Oh my God, this is done by a Malaysian team. This is done by this person and this person." It's like, "Oh, I didn't know Malaysia could actually make content like this." So that's why we decided to make Persona Theory games, was because we wanted to bring our storytelling from advertising and film over to games. So since then, um, I even told Buddy, my background also is I grew up in London, and then after that I grew up mostly in the city in Kuala Lumpur. So I've always felt a disconnect with who I am as a Malaysian, as a Malay, as whatever else my blood has. Yeah, I have in my blood. And I told this to Buddy, and he said that maybe we should explore what the subcultures we have here. So that's when he introduced me and the team to Edin Koo and Pauline Fan from Pusaka. Through that, we started on this inspiring journey of going through all the Malaysian, not all, but most of the Malaysian subcultures that we have here, starting from the Kuda Kepang family in Johor. Then we were introduced to the Mat Yong family. So it was very eye opening of what it means to be, a Malaysian, our even cultural roots that dates back all the way to Java, and what it means to be, even what it means to be a Muslim, and what it means to be uh, a lot of the things came from gender talks and all that, and all the things that always has been in our culture, and people are forgetting about it. And that's when we decided we need to make a game based on our culture. So that's where Cabaret is born. So Cabaret was very hard to get off the ground, like really, really hard. Like
Oh,
locally, nobody wanted to support it because it was too exotic. They had this thing called our shadow puppets is called wayang kulit. So a lot of the locals are seeing it like, why, like we want Call of Duty and things like that. They don't see the merit of it. I'm like, and then one funder even say, "Oh, we don't care about culture," and then that literally broke me for a while. Like we wanted to give up completely, but then we needed to finish one game because Fires at Midnight was very personal. Even though it was set in Malaysia, it was a lot of um, our own experience growing up, especially Buddy, who wrote most of the script. Is a lot of trauma inside there. So after that game was done, we on a whim I pitched it to Wings Interactive. So it's an international group of game developers that fund women-led teams and underrepresented people in game devs. I thought it wouldn't go through, and they got back to me and said, "We've never seen anything like this. We need to make this made. Like, come on, let's do it." And here we are. So the rest was history. So it's amazing how much since we started Cabaret and we've been promoting it, how much support we've gotten internationally compared to locally. So most of our audience comes from the US, Europe. Everyone has never seen things like that. Our first trailer went a bit viral, and all the comments, most of them were from countries that, not even in Southeast Asia. They were like, "What's this? What's this? What's this?" So there are interest in it. So so that's why we wanted to do what we do. So yeah, so that's Cabaret.
so I've got like two tangents based on that. Um, yeah. So
Oh yeah,
first of all,
Pusaka
like
is in the link.
I think it's really exciting that you're making Cabaret in the first place, because I'm always excited to see Asian stories told by Asians, and even more so to see basically like Malaysian stories being told by Malaysians, being worked on by Malaysians. It's nothing that says that, people who are non-Malaysian can't work on these things, but also, we're here, we should be able to tell the stories the best.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
so I think that's really great, and I think that's probably why you have such an impression on the international audience. So I'm really excited for Cabaret to come out, and I wish you all the best in that development journey.
Thank
It's
you.
also quite interesting to hear about how you pitched it to Wings, like the fact that they were like, "We've never seen this, we gotta make it made." I think that's so good. So suddenly
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe I should pitch to Wings.
You
Maybe
should.
I have an idea they've never heard of.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's dominate the space. Wings
Yes.
is now owned by Malaysia.
Yes.
So that is the one tangent. The other one is, I didn't bring up Sarah's Missing, but I will say honestly, as a student, it kind of changed my perspective on the local game development industry. Just know that you worked on Sarah is Missing. Because when it came out, right, most of the game space was not narrative driven. And I pride myself on somebody with an interest in narrative design. So seeing that there was not only this story, this game that was kind of like different from the norm, because we're not like other girls over here, but it was also like being kind of spearheaded by another Malaysian woman. It was really eye-opening, and it felt like, oh, the doors, she's opened. It felt very that. So I was just so excited to see that, and then to see you continue to grow from there and continue to become like this true like force of nature in the development space, not only in Malaysia, but on an international platform. It is fantastic. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not only a moderator, perhaps I am a fan. Who knows? So thank you so much, Sakina. Now I would like to shine a spotlight on Michelle. Hello. Hi.
Hello. Gosh,
Hi.
Sakina's career is so cool and her games are so cool. Everyone, please go regard the amazing work over there. Just needed to give some space and credit where credit is due.
True.
But hello.
Howdy, hello. Please tell me more about you and your development journey. I understand you also were like, you're a student of like game development. You studied it to an extent, right?
I sure did. Yeah. So my story in game development is I knew I wanted to be a game developer since I was very small. When I was 7 years old, nice. Yeah, when I was 7 years old, I was like, I'm gonna be a game designer. And somehow that answer didn't change. Which is beyond me. But so I just kind of like chased that forever. And then I wound up at USC Games and I studied game development there. And during my time there, I had the opportunity to work on some pretty awesome stuff. One of those things, it's one of the projects both of the projects I'll be talking about today started there, which is one is Plasticity, which is a game about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, where my good friend Ames and I wanted to make something about the plastic problem and issues around plastic pollution, because we both were feeling very helpless about these issues in the world. And in addition to game development, my other very big passion in life is environmental justice. And so they were like, well, Michelle, what if we combined the two? And then that is how the magic started. So we worked on that game together, which is pretty awesome. Really love where that went. And then the year after, I was the lead designer on that project, but the year after, I had the opportunity to pitch my own project. And another issue that is very near and dear to my heart is wildlife conservation. And I wanted to make a game about that as well. And so I was fortunate enough to be the director of that project. And I was able to borrow from a lot of games that I also really love and really inspired me when I was younger. Like my favorite games ever are Nintendo games. I have a Legend of Zelda tattoo on my arm. I'm a big nerd, but so they really inspire me. And so I took a slightly different angle, was still trying to communicate this message that meant a lot, but to draw from some of my really early inspirations and what got me into game development in the first place, which was a lot of like Magic Sparkles and Nintendo eCharm. So yeah, I got to work on those two games in college, which was awesome. My team and I continued developing Beasts for a year after college, and it's out now. It's been out since last year, but and yeah, now I am just working in the big boy AAA game space. I haven't done indies in a bit, but maybe someday I'll go back there, but I reflect on it fondly.
Look at you, AAA developer. Woo! From humble beginnings, like game
somehow.
Yeah, that's so cool though, because like I looked at your games, right? And I mean, you can really see the love for those causes that went into it. It really showed that you have a true passion for, wildlife conservation, and also a true passion for essentially taking care of the planet. And it really showcases itself through the game, because, sometimes these things feel like they're being added in as sort of like an afterthought, or like, I can't exactly think of the game equivalent at the moment, but when you watch something and you're like, oh, they're trying to get an Emmy, sometimes you get that feeling. So for you, it feels like it's all like baked into the goods. It's done. It's good. It's meant to be there. So I think that's super good. And I have questions about like the thought process. No problem. So we're going to get into the questions. Oh my gosh. Okay. So yeah, some of the questions I have here are for both of you and some of them are for each of you individually. So we'll just go into the questions for like both of you first. We'll start with Sakina as well. So I would like to ask about how you translate an idea or a concept that you want to present to an audience into a game mechanic. You know, you have a lot of these big ideas that go into your games, and then how does that take the form of a game, you know?
Okay. Uh, Let me try to think of which game I want to reference now, because I think all of our games we always start with this feeling of what we want to tell the player. You know, like in Fireside Midnight. Fireside Midnight was like the silliest way to make a game because every scene was so different, and every scene was like so like made for just that scene, and it cannot be used for another scene at all. So I don't recommend ever making a game like Fireside Midnight. But it was an experience. It was very experimental. So Fireside Midnight was about game. It's a game about a couple trying to survive a pandemic. And it was released during a pandemic, and I cannot
Oh my
believe that
God.
happened. It was very
Apollo
depressing.
smacked you in the head with the
It
gift
was
of
very
prophecy.
depressing, and I cannot. And something happens in Cabaret later, in the story that happened here in Malaysia this year. So you will see it when you see it. You're like, oh, so we were thinking our third game needs to be something very very happy when nothing bad happens. but but yeah, Fires at Midnight is more an intimate story about a couple trying to stay together. So in it, you see through the point of view of the guy first, about his story, about his backstory, and then how he thinks his relationship is with his girlfriend. And then when you flip and then you see the girlfriend side, you see her point of view is completely different, right? So if you've been in love, or if you've been in like a traumatic relationship, abusive relationships, or even like your family members have said things that are not very nice, even like generational abuse is something that we talk about a lot 'cause it's very prevalent in Asian families. um, we think about what is the feeling we want to have. Like we want to show that there are some good times with the couple, but there are also some really 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 screwed up times that they go through. So because we believe that like the games that we make, our games don't change people, like how we make the game change them, how we want to tell our traumas through games. So we start with that. We start with the feeling, we start with how we would, because we're filmmakers as well, so we think about the scene, the story, what are the feeling we want the players to do. Like if the player was feeling, we want him or her to feel like the character is very stressed and about to do something not right, and you want to make them feel like so we just bombard them and bombard them all these things. And sometimes when we watch the let's plays, that it works. So yeah, it's a lot of experimenting. We don't do, I think our studio don't do things the conventional way. We really think about what is the meaning behind a particular scene instead of the overall story. Like the overall story, we do have a theme, but in that one micro scene, what is the player's journey with the character, and then we build up on that.
That's really cool. Now that you've pointed it out, it's like, oh yeah, like Fires at Midnight, each scene is very individual, but it also manages to come together quite well. So now I'm like, I'm having a thing. And then so in terms of game mechanics as well, one of the other things is Project Half-Light, right?
Yeah.
It has sort of dialogue mechanic, and then there's even a timer on it that make you feel extra stressed. Like, how did you come up with the idea to, make essentially everything into a QTE in a sense and stress the player out? Because it's so realistic, I haven't played it for myself, but I have been watching a lot of the gameplay, and it's like, I'm stressed. So it's effective.
Half-Light, we all had to sit around like and confront our own traumas.
Oh
So
boy.
a lot of backstory came out, a lot of either you have been faced with gender-based violence, as in you indirectly caused it, or you were part of it, or is it through like a significant other at that time, or somebody like a teacher, or even your parents. Parents said, oh, girls shouldn't do this, boys shouldn't do this, boys don't cry, especially that's very There's a very big thing in Asian families. Boys have to be this, men have to be this. So a lot of that has been like put into the thought process of Project Half Light about how we wanted to talk about gender-based violence in Malaysia, and not just to help girls, but to help boys face their own, like, what are they going through, because sometimes they cannot process it because they're not supposed to process it, because they're supposed to be men. So men have no feelings. So we a lot of the things that was thrown in Half-Light was things that we've all been through, like somebody say something very like offhand racism, like, and you feel like, okay, but we let things slide too often,
Yeah.
yeah, we really do, like, especially even when I was I didn't really face it when I was in production for some reason, but I faced it when I was in games and I was trying to pitch my ideas, and I was going to things like Level Up, and it's a very boys club. Like, really, it's the same group of guys,
Yeah.
and I've been faced with like things, things that was said to me to my face that wasn't very nice. And it at that time, now I reflected on it, I was like, I should have said something, I should have said something, I should have been more assertive, like, no, you cannot kick me out of here just because I am new here, or my group does things differently, we're not like you guys. So it comes with that kind of feeling, like you wish that you did something, that you
Yeah.
wish you said something different. That's the whole premise of Half-Life, to know when to say something, how to say something, and even if you choose not to say something, like in Half-Life, why didn't you? You have to reflect, like, maybe because in our society, maybe we're too scared to say something, like, we're and in Asian culture, you're not supposed to go against anyone older, right? Like teachers, you're
Yeah.
supposed to respect them. So when a teacher says something that is either racist or like very ridiculed, you don't feel comfortable to confront the person. But I feel like if you don't feel comfortable, you should be able to say to the teacher that you're not comfortable. Why aren't you feeling comfortable? So it comes from that. And also because maybe growing up, all my team members have always been quite we try not to say, to stand out, to get people to be mad at us. So I think that
Mm, mm,
fear,
mm.
that fear of growing up, like what if my dad takes out the belt, the famous belt, or our tuition teacher takes out the we call it the rota at school,
Rotan.
the rota whack. It comes from all that kind of feeling. And even now, I think everyone has been through a situation where somebody says something about your skin color, even the size of your body, your hair. Sometimes you don't feel like, oh, that's very mean, why did you say that? But you just let it go. So that's what Project Half-Light mechanic is about.
I think it's really important that you're shining a light on, these microaggressions essentially, or, they're not even micro, they're like massive aggressions
Yeah.
basically, to the younger audience, because, it took me a long time, like finishing university, right, to realize like, people have been racist to me like my whole life. So, I'm like coming to terms with that. It's like, I didn't even realize I was being marginalized. It was just so baked into the culture, not necessarily the Malaysian culture, but just the culture of existing. I didn't realize that my teachers and stuff and my peers were actually just minimizing my experiences, and they were saying whatever they thought they could get away with. And I used to think like, that's a compliment. It just means I'm different. It's not. It just means like, they're like highlighting these things in a public audience. And then like, if I felt uncomfortable, I didn't know how to speak up, because like you said, we are taught not to speak up to our elders. We are taught not to experience discomfort. We are taught, especially as women or other underrepresented genders, we are taught to not take up space. It is just easier to just let everything be. So the fact that now we have this new generation of developers, of gamers who are more vocal and more aware of these kinds of things is incredibly important, so we can create a overall society that is kinder and better to all of us. So, thank you for sharing your insight on how these mechanics are developed.
Thank you.
Now, Michelle, I want to know about your games. Tell me about the environment. How does the environment become game?
Well, yeah, I would love to. I'm just like snaps for everything that was said for the previous stuff. Being a woman in game development is hard, y'all. I'm sure you all know. And So it's really, really awesome to be on this great panel with a bunch of women here and get to just commiserate and be empowered by one another. But anyway, environments in video games. Yeah, so I'll start with plasticity because that was the first game that I made that was about an environmental issue. And so, yeah, like what was really important to us when we were developing plasticity is that the issue that we were communicating wouldn't just be communicated through like visuals and stuff. Like it wouldn't be that sort of like afterthought that you were mentioned. We wanted the mechanics to fundamentally be something that was engaged with the social problem at hand. And so that was something that we knew going into it. And especially a big thing I think about making games about like any social issue, but I feel like especially with issues of the environment is it's very easy for people to like see something upsetting and then be like, well, then what's even the point? It's like, you've given me this sad image. And so like, it's too far gone. I'm just not going to do anything. And what's interesting is that my design partner Ames and I tried a couple, because like, you know, both of us being like fully and intimately aware of like the havoc that the plastic problem has caused, like we feel raw and sad and we're like, we need other people to feel raw and sad too. But like I said, a lot of folks would react to that and just be like, they would like be in denial or they'd feel like attacked or and like those are all very human things to feel like when you are being communicated something that is unpleasant to hear. And so we learned that hope is essential and giving like the player agency into the mechanics for them to like use that hope and like use the sort of like good piece in their heart that they have to like make a change. Like we wanted to take that and like really, really tend that flame. So like the sort of big thesis of plasticity and like what you do in it is you play as this young girl who like hates where she's at. She feels like it's hopeless. Like her mother has passed away. She's filled in this like trash filled land. And she's like, I need to go to this like promised land where everything's gonna be better. Like my mom told me about this island when I was younger. Like I'm just gonna run away and everything's gonna be better there. And I'm gonna leave all this like trash world behind. And on your journey there, you are confronted with multiple choices that you can make in order to solve puzzles, in order for you to traverse. So like, for example, there is an area where there's two ways that you can cross a river. One of the ways is super simple. You just like, you go over, you pull the lever, or like you push a box, you pull a lever and you can move on. But then there's another way where if you think about things a little bit differently, you can actually go an extra step and use this cage that you were using to traverse across the land to pick up a bunch of nets that were polluting the water along the way. And so even though that's like a very sort of gamey way of manifesting how one can like contribute to the environment, we wanted to express like, if you put in like a little bit more thought and intention in your actions, like they will pay off. But the sort of what happens to sort of bring this all together is you actually travel backwards through the level that you just traveled left to right through, like a traditional platformer style. And then we subvert that and we have you traveling from right to left and you walk back through the game that you just played, but 10 years into the future. And depending on the choices that you made, your environment will be different. And so even if you made the like unsustainable choice and like you did the thing that was quick or you did the thing that was not as thoughtful, we didn't want to end the game with like, and now you should feel bad. Like we, as much as we wanted to, but it wasn't like, yeah, you messed up, feel bad. We are like honest, like we show like the upsetting imagery. We show like how your actions have impacted the world. But immediately when you reach that endpoint and see how your actions have damaged the world, you are given an option to like do it again. Like they were like, I wonder how the world would be if I did things a little differently. And like we really tried to like lean into the aspect of like, it's okay to mess up. like it's okay to mess, but if you are given the option to do better, like it is never too late to start doing the right thing. Today is always the best time to start doing the right thing. Like so in any social circumstance, but yeah, like with environmental impacts, especially since it takes so long for those things to really realize themselves, or for the impacts to become apparent. We're like, what if we just shrunk that time scale and had it over the course of like a 45-minute game? And so people got to see like point A to point B, what happens. And like, hey, if you messed up 10 years ago, it's cool, like kind of lame, like the world does hurt for it, but you can still fix it. Like you can still do stuff about it. So those are really big learnings for how we could like communicate an environmental message effectively while making plasticity. And there were lots of things to sort of juggle around the issue that I mentioned of like hitting it enough so that people knew what we were trying to communicate to them, but not hitting it like too hard that people were like, whoa, 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 what the heck? You're preaching to me right now. Ugh, yeah, I don't like it. So it was very challenging for sure. But I think we reached a balance that we're pretty happy with. We definitely had to make some concessions on messages that we wanted to send, but that's okay. It's like it's out there. And my favorite review that we've ever received was, this game made me start recycling and call my mother. And
That's what we wanted. That's how you
I know, it's like, we got
Call
it.
your
We got it.
mom.
We got it. We got it. I need to like print it out and put it on my wall. I was like, Ames,
Yeah,
we did it.
Quilt it.
Yeah.
Embroider on a pillow, the whole thing.
Yeah. So that was the sort of development arc of plasticity. I could talk about beasts too, but I can wait for if there's other questions too. I don't want to commandeer the time, but yeah.
I think that's great. I really, okay, I'm going to touch on that whole like balancing between like, the message and the preaching, I'm going to touch on that a bit. But I think it's really nice how you impress this message of hope, because sometimes with these games that promote messages, or any kind of media that has like a very strong message, the whole ending is like, and now everything sucks. Mm-hmm. And it's on you. You're the bad guy. It's like the game makes you make bad decisions, and it goes, and now you're the bad guy. You're the bad one. You feel bad. That's it, So I think it's really important that you had that message of hope that was so evident throughout the entire thing, and then it showcased even in the quote unquote bad ending. And I think that's fantastic. So my gosh, you get claps and stuff.
Thanks.
So I will be touching on Beast in a bit. I will definitely ask you more about Beast in a bit.
Perfect.
So yeah, because I really like how Beast looks, so I want to ask more.
Thank you.
So my next question is, you're welcome. My next question is like, Sakina, can you tell me more about the aftermath of the game? What were some of the reactions from within the industry, and also like outside of it from the general consumer? Because I'm also aware that Fires at Midnight got a lot of people talking, not necessarily because it's a game, but because people were like, this game is from Malaysia, but it's talking about all these personal stories. We can make things like the Netflix. So I know that was like a big audience reaction at one point at its release. But I am curious, like, how did developers react to it versus like the typical, or even the non-typical consumers react to it?
Okay, one of the best or funny reviews that I read, I think it was locally, and I think one of the scenes in Fires at Midnight triggered something in the writer, like, oh my god, this was my trauma, because they had in the scene in Fires at Midnight, it was the couple was arguing, and you hear the old newspaper in the background, and he was like, oh, I remember the time when my parents was arguing over the sound of this exact soundtrack. This exact scene was part of my childhood, and I think it brought back a lot of memories for the writer, and it was so it got a lot of people talking. And when we were even like watching people play, we had friends played it before we released it, and some of them come from like mixed race relationships. So there was in Fires at Midnight, the girl is Chindian and the boy is Chinese. The Chindian girl, her parents went through a lot of even though they're not really like perfect for each other, but before they got married, they went through a lot of things a lot of couples can relate to, especially if you're dating someone from the different race. A lot of racist issues come out, like, oh, you're going to be with a Malay person. Are you going to convert? And then you're with a Chinese person. Are you going to start eating pork? All these weird questions start popping up before you even ask, do they love each other? Love is never in the equation for Asian families, never. So I think a lot of people were starting. I was watching this one person play, and he was like at that scene where he was talking about how the grandparents on both sides said something very racist, um, and the 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 player was just like, and funny enough, the person just broke up with his girlfriend who over the same issue. So he was like,
Timing.
yeah. I was like, oh shit, I didn't know. So it brought up a lot of things, and it made people realize that actually, like, all the things that the characters was going through was a very, very close to their heart, and it really started the conversation about relationships, how we are with our parents and our grandparents, and things that were okay with our grandparents that got brought down through the generation is probably not okay now. They have their
Yeah.
own casual racism back then that is totally fine, but they also lived through a war. so so it was a whole different time. So now we are having this conversation about whether or not it was okay for this to continue on, and then also talking about what we go through. And in Cabaret also we touched a bit on our grandparents' stories about going through during the Japanese occupation, how nobody seems to like to talk about the Japanese occupation internationally.
Yeah.
Like in Japan, I think I might be wrong, but I know a lot of Japanese people who didn't even know that they conquered Malaysia and what they did to our grandparents, the kind of trauma they went through, and then that trauma being passed down to us now. So I mean, like, the we know that the way we promoted Fires at Midnight, it is very erotic. So for the kids here, if you're underage, I'm not sure whether your parents will allow you playing Fires
Don't
at
look it up
Midnight.
yet. Don't look it up yet.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it is quite healthy to talk about things like this, to be aware of it. Um, so locally, a lot of people were talking about their own trauma. Like, even though everyone thought, oh, this game has boobies, but then it said boobies. It's like, oh no, I thought it would be like, a happy game, but no, it's
Booby
just
game.
it's
Yeah, booby game.
depression booby time. Okay. So a lot of people were facing their own, like, bringing back up things they buried deep down. So that has been interesting, and reading up on people's reaction to it internationally. I guess even though it's a very Malaysian story, they relate to what the characters go through. Like, just because you've been with somebody for years and you think that person is your soulmate, your forever, you never know how the other person is feeling. You never know how the other person is perceiving the relationship. So it might be totally different. So a lot of people came up to that. I think there was one YouTuber that said that, an American YouTuber that said that, because there's a cult aspect in Fires at Midnight as well. The mom joined a cult, and he was like, "Oh, I was with somebody who wanted me to join a cult," and then the guy was like, "Seriously, bro?" Yeah, and then they started talking about also these two dudes talking about cults in US and how he was almost conned into joining his ex-girlfriend's cult. So I was like, so it is very real. So it is, even though it's a Malaysian story, a lot of the points that we were making does happen internationally, like, joining a cult. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just, like, to anybody who's not played the game, who's not aware of the game, this would be such an interesting way to get interested in it. It's like, yeah, the game's got eroticism, intimacy, a distinctly Malaysian story. It touches on trauma and race. There's a cult.
Yeah.
His mom joins a cult.
Yeah.
It's not bad.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's totally
It's
a
a
lot.
lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's good. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes you wonder what kind of people the other people in Persona Theory are like.
We'll interview them next.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's been great. So I'm looking forward to cabaret because a lot of it is about Southeast Asian topics. But we've been testing it with people, and it has strike a chord. Like, okay, I didn't know about this, and I am very interested to know when we release the game how like Japan would react, because we explicitly talk about the Japanese occupation as well, and I'm wondering whether we will get banned. But we had to put our foot down.
It's important to acknowledge these things. I remember I've
Yeah.
seen on the Discourse Bird app, as we know, Twitter, there are some like even Malaysians who are like, Japan isn't bad, they gave us anime. Like, dude, ask your grandpa the same thing, man. Like, come on.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, my grandpa also lived through the occupation. He was a kid during that time, so I've heard the stories about the bikes and the everything. Like, I know it was
the
rough, it was
massacre.
bad.
Yeah.
The massacre,
Yeah.
these are the facts. We
Yeah.
can't downplay
The
these
comfort
things.
woman. Yeah.
It's a whole thing. So,
Yeah.
kudos to you for, being like, we're gonna put our foot down. This happened.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you
I'm
know
excited.
whether or not we get banned in Japan later this year. Find out more.
So, okay. Later this year,
Yeah,
banned
later
in
this
Japan.
year.
That's the headline. It rhymes. It's got to be the headline. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right.
Yeah.
So Michelle, can you tell us about like what was the reaction from the release of your game?
Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure. So because one was very much like, this is a game about a social issue. Like, Plasticity was not trying to be sneaky with what it was trying. It literally has plastic in the name. Like, it's very, very clear that we are trying to communicate something about the environment. We were really nervous, actually, when we were releasing it. We were like, we'll be lucky if we hit mixed. Like, we were super, super like ready for it to just be like torn apart, because since we released it on Steam as well, and unfortunately, some Steam reviewers are not the nicest people, or maybe no shade, actually maybe a little bit of shade, but they sometimes don't have the most empathy or understanding for games that are not really the norm of games that they would expect to find on the platform. So we were actually very pleasantly surprised by the reception that we received for Plasticity. It got a lot of positive reviews, which we are super grateful for. So like it very much struck a chord with people, which, yeah, we were like shocked by, as I mentioned, we're like, oh my God, wow, like we're not getting flamed. There were definitely some angry gamers in our reviews. Let that be clear. Some people were like, the whole concept of this game is a fallacy. And I was like, okay, like, all right, guys. But so, there's some angry gamers in there for sure. Or some people that like talked about how they just like totally didn't land for them, or like even still felt like they were being preached to, like it was, but you can't win them all. You cannot win them all. But yeah, but we were very pleasantly surprised by that. Like overall, it was received well. People would say that they like cried and stuff, and that's always like the best compliment ever.
Good. You
like,
got them
yes,
to
yes,
feel.
it's like we want them to cry. Exactly. It's like we need that. And I think that, yeah, like just like folks who played it, definitely like a lot of them did come away feeling a little differently about their relationship to plastic, which is good. Like I don't like, it's hard to know with the amount of players that we have if it like really profoundly changed someone's life and view about plastic. I sure hope so. That would be really cool. Excuse me if you hear my cat in the background. Sorry, he's going.
Guest speaker. It's fine.
Yeah. Anyway, he's being naughty. But yeah. So. But yeah, it was. I think that like we were grateful that like we were able to like get people to feel that emotional impact at all. With Beasts, it was interesting because it was even though there was like an issue, like an environmental issue woven into it, that was not the forefront of its like marketing and presentation. It was, and that was very intentional, and like it was also because it was a game that was about this issue that meant a lot to me and the team, but it was. But it wasn't necessarily a game that was centered around that social issue front and center. It was something that we'd hoped to have people kind of like notice. And we more wanted like like a seed to be planted, and then maybe it would bloom someday. or maybe they'd play it and then they'd be like, this is a game about wildlife conservation. Oh my God, it's all a metaphor for wildlife conservation. Wow. And like, it really such a mixed bag. Like some people I'd pitch the game to and they'd be like, oh yeah, oh, it's a game about wildlife conservation. And I'd be like, wow, nice job. Some people just whoosh, like they wouldn't get it, but they'd be like, oh, that's a cool game. But that's fine, you know, like it's valid to experience it in both ways. But
yeah,
I know like for me, like a lot of the games that really like changed my life when I was younger weren't necessarily games that were marketed as games about social impact, but they kind of like planted a seed within me about certain values and beliefs of the world. And that had an impact on me as I grew up, and started like thinking about the world through that framing. So yeah, and like the reception to Beasts was good too. Like a lot of folks really appreciated like that we referenced real wildlife anatomy and behaviors and stuff. There was a really awesome other speaking engagement that I was a part of where one of the co-speakers was a National Geographic photographer.
Oh wow.
And she said she really appreciated that we promoted responsible wildlife observation habits in our game, because it was very important to us, like because like I'm a huge advocate for animals and wildlife. I was like, we have to like abide by these actual rules of how to like engage with wild animals, because I don't want people playing this game and thinking that it would be okay to like go then like feed a tiger. Like that's bad. Please don't do that. Please don't feed wild animals. It's bad for them. Not just tigers, but so it's like everyone. I mean, and like the biggest critique that we get though, that always makes me laugh because they treat it like it's an oversight rather than a deliberate design choice is, why can't I pet the animals? Why can't I pet the animals? And I'm like,
bite your hands off, babe.
Because they're wild animals. And like, I want to pet them too. Like, please believe me. If I see a bear, I want to be like, yes, hello. But like, that's irresponsible for so many reasons. So, but it's very funny. So some people just like totally didn't get it. And they like thought that these choices of like not letting you feed them, not letting you pet them, not having them do XYZ thing was an oversight rather than a deliberate choice. So that, I think that was it. I'm so glad you guys are having this reaction because I was also like, what? But so it's always really interesting to see that, especially because I think it was not presented as a game about a social issue. People had certain expectations about it. And when those expectations weren't met and they actually had like positive values that we wanted to promote for that were like applicable to real life, that like caught people off guard. But some people like really vibed with it. Like that National Geographic person, she was like, yeah, like way to stick to your guns, like nice job. And that was good. But yeah, that was the reception.
I'm just kind of stuck on this, like, your game is bad because we can't pet the dog. Like, you know, I go on twitter.com/can you pet the dog, and it's like, I can pet the bear in your game. Like,
you know, and it's like, and if it was a dog, okay, but like these are wild animals.
It's a bear. It's a bear.
These are wild animals. No, you cannot pet the wild animal. I'm sorry.
You know, it's like, you know, but I mean, like, I think it's interesting, especially that was like the grand takeaway for some people. It's like, I liked your game. I think it was pretty. It was really fun to play, but I couldn't pet the tiger. That makes me sad.
Yep, you would not believe how many times I've seen that sentiment, and I'm like,
oh my god. So your next game just has to be purely like a petting simulator.
Petting animals only.
Yeah.
I'd play that game. That sounds like fun. But
there you go. You need to make like a cat cafe game where all you can do is just pet the cats. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I play that too.
I love petting animals. Like, let's be clear.
Yeah. Animals are great. Animals are wonderful. Like I understand that both of you have cats, and I applaud you for that. Cats are great. So like, I'm going to be jumping a bit between the questions I had initially provided because, you know, we're so interesting, all three of us, that we can't stop talking about how interesting we are in our work. So I'm going to go into the questions that are for each of you individually. So for Sakina specifically, you mentioned about Project Half-Light. It's kind of like a long-term project which involved interviewing students as they age and learning from these experiences. So how did you initiate this interview process? And were these students aware of the issues that were being presented within the game? Because, again, I mentioned earlier that like I wasn't aware of these things personally until I was much older. So reflecting on it, it really does unearth a lot of, shall we call it, the trauma. So are these kids aware of the trauma, at that point already, or were they just introduced to it when you talked to them?
The thing is about Half-Life is we just created a prototype last year, and now we're looking for funding for that game for us to be
Mm-hmm.
able to do the finished product and do the research as we go along. So we have not done that yet, but we do have them. I do have a team that will be doing that. So we're working with not just Shiro Hub, which is Elsa, who I met in Level Up, and she as well is a survivor of gender-based violence. So that's the reason why I wanted to go into this project with her. We're collaborating with None in Three. It's another organization that talks about gender-based violence globally in through games. So they themselves have done a lot of both both teams have done a lot of projects where they like for example Elsa's last game was in Haiti. So it's
Mm.
about in Haiti there's a very low level of like how many women can actually read. So everything is has to be recorded, tell to them like the story will be told to them, and then there will be options. So then there'll be someone there telling them which is the option that you think is right, and there will be a survey like how did you feel about it, because the what they go through in Haiti is very different from what we go through, and their community is the women sometimes are not even have to work at a young age. So these are the things that is tackled in that game, that version of the game. In the US one, I think it was more towards high school kids, what they go through. A lot of and None in Three have done amazing research. Also with another game designer named Kat Schreier, I think, if I'm not mistaken, she will also hopefully be on this project with us on Half-Life. Um, so the process will be to create the game, have the ability to see which students we will follow up with, you know, in every year. Typically, this kind of research thing, you expect 50% to like not be interested in getting the data again. So it is a very long term goal to see whether or not this game does strike any behavior change to the kids as they grow up. Do they think about it? Do they tell their fellow classmates that, hey, maybe this is not what you should say or what you should do, or maybe we should be more aware of each other and be kinder. Yeah.
I think that's great. Like you're trying. There is an attempt, because
Yeah.
I think that there's so much not to say it's like super rampant, even though it kind of is super rampant. Like people are just complacent. Things are just the way they are because the way they are. What you gonna do about it? You're gonna do a thing about it. Like, it's good that you're in a sense challenging that kind of thought process, and you're taking the initiative to do the work essentially. And also you're not talking purely out of your own experience, but you're also discussing things from like, the point of view of a lot of other people as well. So I think that is the good work, and I'm looking forward to the full release of Project Half-Light. It's my understanding that it's actually the demo at the moment is like one aspect of it. Later on, you're going to be tackling like more issues. Will the mechanics change in any way? Has that been decided?
That has not been decided, but knowing us, probably yes. So as we go along, we feel like, oh, this needs to be in, or we need to make the character feel like they are doing something. So like, get really feel the tension of that scene, or feeling like you've been attacked. So we'll figure it out as we go along. But yeah, a lot of things that we want to talk about is how family impact the character, how relationships impact the character, friends, community, the community
Mm.
you, because Half-Life is does take place in like a suburb, so it's mostly about what we've seen. So maybe later on, if the game does well in schools, or the research does really well, we get a lot of support and funding, then we can do a different versions for different areas. uh, that part of it will probably have a lot of research because it's not something that we're used to. So yeah, a lot of the things when it comes to our way of doing things like writing about trauma or even culture is about getting the right consent. Do we have the right to tell the story? If it's not us who are going through the trauma and we are telling somebody else's trauma, do we have the right to even tell it through the game? So a lot of things, a lot of self-reflection when you go through making tough games like we do.
But I think it's really good that you're, actually doing the research. And also you mentioned consent, which is so important because a lot of people would like to tell these stories and then they have this trauma as like a plot element. They're borrowing the stories of other people, other underrepresented people, or just straight up like their friends without the consent of the original storyteller or the person who actually lived through the experience. I can only imagine how traumatizing it is to like boot up this like award-winning game and suddenly you're like, that happened to me, what happened?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really good that you're putting the measures in place to not only create something that says something, but not at the, not at the expense of the people that you're talking about, because sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. I'm so excited for it. So again, everybody, please check out Project Half-Light on Persona Theory's itch account. Check it out. So my next question, my final question for now, really will be for Michelle. So I really like how there are differences in tone and storytelling between Beasts and also Plasticity. Obviously you were also a different person in those two games. Like, what Plasticity is your first game, right? You mentioned, and then Beast is your most recent. So can you tell us a little bit more on like why you chose to take different approaches in tone and storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, my cat's being a little tyrant and was about to knock something over that was going to make a loud noise. Anyway, yeah. So with Plasticity, I wanted to. At the time, like I was really troubled by the fact that there were a bunch of like these environmental issues that were going on. Like I remember like around the time that we had decided that we wanted to make it, there was like some nasty legislation that like allowed for a bunch more pollution in the States, and I was like feeling just very disheartened and sad. And that's when my friend was like, oh, we should do that. Because I was like, what if I quit games and then working and I was like, I'm not doing anything. And they're like, well, it doesn't have to be that way. Let's do this thing. But so that was definitely where my like heart and mind and creative spirit was like doing something that was very like tragic, doing something that was very contemplative, and doing something that like focused more on like the specificity of the issue, rather than something that was like more metaphorical. And because I think like because like we were hurting so much because of this issue, and like we were like just becoming more and more intimately aware and more like affected by it directly, that we were like, okay, like we want to take this like sadness that we are feeling and we want to turn that into this game. But then, as I mentioned before too, like a big piece of that was also like finding like the hope, finding like where like it's okay to fall down and make mistakes, but you can never be too late and like starting to make a change and stuff like that. But so it was definitely an exercise in like for us, not only as like trying to make a game that communicated this like very specific environmental message effectively, but then also learning how to like navigate our own emotions around the issue and like how we can communicate about this issue to other people. So tonally, like that influenced a lot of our like designs and how we really wanted it to be like tugging at the heartstrings. It's like, I wouldn't call our game is like fun, but like that's not the right word. Like it's meant to be like, it's like an experience. It's like a sad movie. Like you wouldn't go into a sad movie. Yeah, it's an experience. It's like, but it's like engaging, but you're not like, oh boy, what a fun game. And so, and that was very intentional. We wanted to be like very cinematic and like contemplative and stuff like that. And I think that
it feels like art.
Yeah, like it worked well for us for that game, and it landed. And then for Beasts, like I wanted to try my hand at still communicating this message that was really important, but I wanted to sort of give myself the challenge of communicating it through methods that like really impacted me. And then also like I know that like, I mean, we as a society of the world communicate so much fantasy, and like fantasy really helps people understand difficult concepts. And now it definitely helped me understand difficult concepts and like come to terms with things. Like that's why fiction and storytelling and metaphor are so powerful. And so I wanted to I wanted to give myself that challenge of like, how can I still communicate this thing that is like really, it is like a deep metaphor. Like it is, oh my God, I'm so sorry, you guys. My cat's being so annoying, but hopefully you don't hear him being super annoying. If you do, that's my guy. But anyway, so yeah, and like I, especially since I had just spent like a year and a half of my life working on something that was very sad, I was like, it's time to lighten things up a little bit. Like I still want to be true to myself, and I still want to make something that has a strong message. But I wanted to allow myself to create something with a little bit more levity and light, and have that sort of like Nintendo magical sparkly charm and stuff about it. But yeah, and then like I said, where rather than it being more like very, very specific about the message that it was communicating, and like really trying to get players, like if players did not come away from plasticity knowing that it was like about hope and plastic and how to like be a better person, then our design goals would have failed. But with Beasts, it's okay if someone came away from that experience and didn't immediately think like wildlife conservation, but ideally it's more of like a slow burn where it's like it is a piece of media that they consume that had a message, and ideally it's something that they will like reflect on and think about, and it can be like a seed that will grow within them, and then like the metaphor will make sense. It's like the other day, I'm about to blow your mind, everybody. I learned that Monsters Inc. The movie Monsters Inc. by Pixar is a metaphor for the fossil fuel industry. I had no idea. Look this up, but like that's a perfect example of like it totally didn't land for me for decades, and then I was like, oh my god,
that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. Oh my god.
And so like when you do this metaphor that's wrapped in this like cute sparkly wrapper, like you run the risk of it going whoosh, but like eventually I got it. Like this was literally a couple weeks ago, and I like Googled it to confirm. I was like, am I crazy? And I wasn't. But so yeah, but those are like fun too, because I'm sure like whether I realized it or not in my upbringing, like not only Monsters Inc., but I'm sure plenty of other like family friendly content that had a deeper message, like instilled something within me that maybe was subconscious and maybe reframed my view of the world, even though that message wasn't like super explicit, like fossil fuels can be problematic, blah blah blah. But yeah, so that's my story for the two different tones.
I think it's really good that you mentioned the Nintendo Sparkly Flare, because honestly, when I looked at Beast for the first time, even though I've never played it, I know travesty, it made me think of like Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. I don't know, it just
the
really
best compliment ever.
Well, then there you go. Because like I remember I was looking at it and I was like, wow, that water looks really good, like in Wind Waker. Oh wait. So you mentioned like that Nintendo Sparkly Flare, like I get it. It reminds me of like, a Wii game in the best possible way,
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot.
We put that on the page, like reminded me of a Wii game in the best possible way. Now you have to put motion controls next year. I'm sorry, I've doomed you.
We do have gyroscope motion controls on the Switch.
Oh my god!
You can go like this, and your camera will move. It's pretty cool, guys. Go check it
out. That's it. GOTY. Even though it came out last year. So thank you again to the speakers for answering all of my questions. Now I would like to go into the Q&A session so we can tackle some audience questions. We've had like some really interesting ones for everybody, for a specific speaker. There's even one for me. That's wild. I'm included. Wow. We love inclusivity in here. So okay, into the questions. Our first question is for all speakers from Darren. So to what extent do these social issues, be it the questions of identities or the environmental concerns, can they be conveyed successfully? Like there could be room for mixed messages to be transmitted. To me, an example was what happened. The depression preaching was unbalanced and draggy. How do you minimize that misunderstanding, be it in-game or online? So I guess we'll open this to Sakina first.
What's the question? How to avoid
misunderstandings with these social issues? Yeah.
I would say there's a lot of testing involved. Like you don't get it right just like that, especially not when we were making Fires at Midnight. So the original Fires at Midnight was actually quite a little bit more different. So, but when we were doing the testing, and we felt like people were getting lost a lot, so we had to change. The last thing you don't want, you want is for people to be to miss um the whole point of what the scene is about, and get frustrated with your game design. So we try to make it as easy or as intuitive as possible when we want to make our own, like in Fires at Midnight, it's a lot of intuition and a lot of feelings that guides the player how to complete it. Cabaret is a bit more straightforward. You When you play the game, that's is less finding your way in, like in Fires at Midnight. And then in Half-Life, it's still testing. So most of the time you have to test, get feedback, does this work? Get a QA to really like go through and say, oh, this is confusing, this doesn't hit the right mark, or I know what you're trying to do, but maybe this and this instead. So a lot of back and forth before we even like release the game goes to our design.
That's really cool though. I mean, like, especially because all the games you mentioned have very different mechanics as
Yeah.
well. So like how the messaging ties into the mechanics as well, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Nice. So Michelle, how about you? How do you minimize set misunderstandings, be it in-game, online, in regards to your projects?
Yeah, I think we like overcorrected at first. We were like very, I'm talking about plasticity specifically, because that one, it was more important to us to like make sure that that message was like very clearly communicated. I think I'll take a step back too and like answer within yourself first. Like, is the purpose of my game for people to understand what I'm trying to say immediately, or do I want to just instill a value in them that they can like that they might grow to understand like more deeply over time? And like both can be effective for different reasons. But I'll talk about it from like the sort of plasticity standpoint, where it's like the goal of that game was to communicate something very explicitly. But so yeah, we started by like super overcorrecting, and we made it like abundantly clear what we were trying to say. So that make no mistake, this game is about plastic pollution, and here's how we want you to feel about it. Just doing that through the designs that we did, and like and through like writings, and through like art direction and things like that. And like in our early prototypes, like before it had a different name even at the time, but like early prototypes, we relied a lot on literally like facts and just like truths and screenshots and things like that. It was to sort of like communicate what we were trying to do, is like a little bit more of like a sort of documentary flair at the time. And so we like overcorrected, so people got it, but then kind of like I said, like they'll get it, but sometimes like at what cost? Like something, and they'll be like, meh, I don't like it, and I don't agree with it, or whatever. But I think that the method of overcorrecting vastly and then pulling back and adding nuance, and then like Sakina said, like we tested a lot. We relied very heavily on like our playtest feedback, and testing from like not only repeat players, which was helpful, especially for like seeing how like if the communication of the issue has evolved, but getting new people in that had never played it and seeing how they react and if they understood the message, things like that. So yeah, I mean, my advice would definitely be like, understand what the end goal of releasing this game is for you in terms of like how players should feel at the end of it. And if it is meant to be like when they turn off the game, I want them to like really understand the gravity of this issue that I am trying to communicate heavily, then I would overcorrect first and then see where you can pull back on the nuance and still have it land afterwards. Yeah.
I think that's really great. Like, doing the nuance and input. It's always better to cut back than have to like push forward with more content and force yourself to do that, right? So I think that's great. Thank you so much for that. So unfortunately, we are running a little bit short on time, and we can answer one more question before we move on to the next thing. So the next question is also for everybody. It is from Marat. Thank you. Am I correct in assuming that behavioral change comes from becoming aware of something by consciously reliving the experience in the game environment? Are there any ways to measure this type of impact? And is it a lasting change or only for the game time? Sakina first.
Well, I don't think that's a yes or no answer. I think it's it's like us as humans. Every day we're changing, and it's a constant change. No one can be technically nobody can be reduced down to one action, and that is forever being judged forever, and you cannot change. Or like somebody that said that you say a racist remark towards you can never change and not be racist or be aware. People can change. It's up to you as the game developer or designer to think about how you want to change people, because ultimately if you play a game, maybe it won't really change people, but you yourself have to be aware that you want to invoke that change. You as human beings want to invoke that change. um, so I think it's a long term long term thing that we'll be looking for. I don't really have the answer to that, but it's definitely something that is interesting to go through, whether or not people are aware of, like, say, gender-based violence, because it's such a part uh, of our society now. See whether or not our games, as small as it is, does it invoke change in the next generation. So a lot of research, a lot of like going back to the same people who play the game. Did you think differently? Did you think, are you aware of it now? They might be lying. That's the thing. So humans are complicated. Humans are super complicated. There's no right or wrong answer. It's like asking whether or not in a story a hero can be a villain can be a hero. There's no such thing in the real world. Yeah.
So it's like, it depends.
There's no right or wrong. Like, humans are
Yeah.
gray. Humans are complicated. We are complicated people. Like, even though you think that person might be a jerk, what is that person going through? There's so many layers.
True.
Like Shrek. Human people are
Onion have
onions.
layers.
Yeah, we are layers. There's layers to it. Yeah. So every topic you approach, like, even if you want to talk about women empowerment, like, you don't forget that the boys are going through something. How do they help the women empowerment thing? What are they going through to they themselves, they don't realize it. So much layers to, like, this topic, and so much layers to talking about society and all that. So many things. And, like, where do you even start? Like, do you start from the top, like who's in charge, who's telling you all this news, who's molding the government, to all the way down to the people who are at the bottom, who don't realize they're being fed this thing. So it's difficult. It's really difficult.
We live in a society.
We
truly.
do. So yeah, that's my non-answer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the non-answer, but yeah, that's the reality of it.
No, I think that's a very accurate answer. It's a complicated, messy answer, because humans are complicated and messy individuals. It makes sense. We are also like onion. We have layer, just like society.
Yeah, we're all ogres.
I love that. Yeah. Michelle, how about you? What's your take on this?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. Because like when I heard it at first, I was like, wow, like, it's so thoughtful. But I think, like, looking specifically at this question and saying that, like, behavioral change through games but I'm sure that the asker is aware of this, but it is not a definite. Someone could play your game and it could still go whoosh, or they could get it and then they'll be like, cool game, and then they will not actually, like, change their behavior in any way. And that is just something that, like, we as developers and artists of any medium have to reconcile within ourselves. It's not going to change everybody. And I don't think, just to sort of, like, answer this like specific beat of the question where it mentioned, like, consciously reliving the experience in the game environment. I don't think reliving the experience is the only way that you can use to build, like, empathy and understanding for a cause. I think in some instances it can be really powerful, but I think even going back to a much earlier thread of conversation about, like, people telling stories that don't belong to them, there's a lot of really interesting discourse and writing about, like, the concept of empathy games. If this person is interested in reading a little bit further of, it's like some folks making games about stories that, like, don't belong to them, about like sexual assault or racism or things like that, and obviously with very good intentions, but since they did not live that experience, that empathy that it builds feels hollow, and like because and that's like, that is like your sort of cut and dry, like it's a reliving an experience, but maybe someone who did experience those things would have used different methods to communicate that and like enact that behavior change. Like I think even like Sakina's work is a really good example where a lot of like metaphor and fantasy is used to communicate really difficult things. And I think that like, because clearly like her and her team have experiences with this kind of trauma, like that brings a really honest experience to it, and using those pieces of fantasy and metaphor and fiction can make that empathy, understanding, and behavior change even more authentic. So I don't think that like just like reliving the experience is not the only way, and in fact sometimes can be harmful to actually enacting behavior change. I think that there's tons of different paths to do it. And so I wouldn't just like be like, okay, it's in VR and you are the survivor. Like people have tried that and it's like kind of not been cute. So like I wouldn't actually recommend that at all. But I mean, but if you are trying to communicate an experience that's like your own, it can be really powerful. Like I'll even cite like a friend of mine is working on a game about police violence in America, because he and his father, he's a Black man, and so he was pulled over and his father was almost killed at a police stop. And so this is a game about like his very personal autobiographical experience with police violence. And so because it's coming from someone that experienced that trauma, like in that case, reliving that experience and getting people to relive that experience can be really powerful. But it requires a lot of tact if you go the route of like, I'm gonna have someone relive an experience. So anyway, that was a long answer, but it's like, I want to just be like, there's no definitive like, yes, you will change someone's behavior from this. And then I would caution against using the primary framing of having people relive an experience to create behavior change. And then there was is there lasting change or only for game time? It really depends on the player for sure. Like that's some like I mentioned before, some people would just be like, cool game, and they might shed a single tear, but then put away the game and never think about it ever again. But I mean, but yeah, it's like it's really depends on the player, and it's unfortunately kind of impossible to tell unless you want to do like repeated data collection on them. When if you do, like God love you, but like I've not done that for any of my players. So it's hard to say, but it's like, yeah, I think that any sort of like filmmaker or artist or musician or game maker experiences the same thing, where like they can just like hope that their message lands and sticks with someone, but measuring that is very hard unless you actually want to get like data analysts and statisticians and folks to do that. And if you do, like that's lit, like keep me in the loop. But yeah, it's kind of hard to measure those things in numbers.
Basically, like that's art, you know. One of the best things about art, because I stand very firmly on the fact that games are an art, you know, it's up for interpretation. So sometimes it may not always land as intended, and that's just the facts. So again, you know, this is a great question, though. Thank you so much for asking that of our speakers. So I think that kind of wraps it up. You know, we are going to be moving into the promotion of the workshop, which I highly encourage all of you to stick around to listen to. If you have any further questions, please send them onto the Discord link that was shared in the chat, and maybe our speakers will be able to answer them at a later date, you know? So for now, I'm going to be handing it back to the organizers so that they can promote their workshop. Thank you again to our lovely speakers, Sakina and Michelle, for sharing their experiences, their games, wishlist their games. Let's support more developers, you know, 2022, let's get with it. So thank you again, everybody, for the opportunity. I will be passing it back to the organizer.